Hello, this is the SMC Journal Podcast. I'm Scott Moore, your host, and this is a show that's all about performance in IT today. So if you're interested in performance engineering, testing, monitoring, this is the show for you. So in today's episode, I spoke with James Pulley a few weeks ago when he decided to make a career move to QA Consultants, and he is the Chief Performance Officer at QA Consultants today. But we got into a conversation about segmentation in the market, and I mean that in two different ways, segmentation and specialization. We have specialists that are in a particular field, and whatever the title is and whatever that means is not necessarily important to me, but what people do is. I think we're seeing a shift in what people do and their responsibilities. Some gravitate towards more specialization, and some more of a generalization. And some people agree and disagree about that. But then from a tool vendor perspective, I believe we're starting to see segmentation where companies are listening to a specific client base. Their customers themselves are saying, this is what we want, and they're giving them what they want, but they're not trying to bite off the entire elephant, so to speak, in one bite. They're limiting the scope of what they provide. I think that's okay. So I want to bring in James as we start talking about this, and he'll reference an article I'll come back to at the end of the show.
So Scott, a couple of years ago, you came up with the term the SEAL, the software engineer across life cycle, kind of a generic term, but you really targeted at the performance organization. And I think the pictures you used of a SEAL frog team might have scared some people in management around the world, which is why they haven't really adopted that.
I have thought about modifying that. Instead of it being a software engineer across the life cycle, just shorten it to SLE, software lifecycle engineer, to more mimic the SRE. So an SLE would just be that expertise, but across that life cycle. Same thing, just a different title.
Yep.
But that segmentation, you're talking about this. You and I have this mind meld where we both agree that there is still a niche skill set there for performance engineering, and you just can't get around it. There are others who don't like that. They don't want there to be a specialization. They don't like specialization. They feel like you can have all this. You can have your cake and eat it too. So I guess at some point there is a line in the sand where you have to agree to disagree at some point.
It's a question of value.
Yeah.
You can look at an automobile mechanic and you can say, yes, the Formula One automobile mechanics are the same people. They're just automobile mechanics. The NASCAR automobile mechanics, they're the same people. They're just any automobile mechanic will do the job. That we know at heart really cannot be true. There is a specialization that occurs at high performance that requires a different skill set. It requires a wider set of knowledge. This is both in tools, techniques, processes, and that's really what leads to value. Why do you hire an accountant instead of doing it all yourself? Because they're specialized, they're efficient, and they deliver high value. If you're an automobile person, why do you buy a specific brand of tires versus the cheapest tires available? It's really the same thing. It's that specialization, it's that dedication, it's the engineering that goes into it.
And a value too. And so
Yes.
that brings me to the second thing I wanted to talk about, because you mentioned segmentation, and I was talking to Joe Colantonio about this the other day. It's still fresh in my mind, and it's a question I'm going to ask several people that I am very familiar with, such as yourself. So here's the question. Testing vendors, test tool vendors who make load testing products.
Oh, this is going to be good.
So some of them have to bring along all the baggage of every legacy application that ever exists for support, because their customers require that. There are
Yes.
but what if you were a new tool vendor that walks into the door today, and you make the decision, you draw this line in the sand that says Okay, all of our customers are building things on containers. They're all using Kubernetes. They're cloud native. This is the way they started. They don't have any green screen apps. They don't have any desktop apps. They don't have any Citrix. They don't have
Hmm.
any stuff from pre 2014. Okay, are they required by some kind of unwritten law to say, oh, but we have to support all these other technologies in our tool, or we're not considered a legitimate testing vendor? Can't you just say, look, this is our thing? You know, we can't bite off the elephant in one chew. So we're offering this to what our customers are asking for, and as long as that's their customer base and they know what they're asking for and they're building what they ask for, isn't that okay?
Well, let's talk about a question of transport. You said if an organization starts today and they build from the ground up, everything is web based
Mm-hmm.
from a transport perspective. That it's web technologies,
Mm-hmm.
they're using HTTP. All of that is great, and any HTTP based tool will help them. And that includes the classical vendors that support 30 plus different interfaces, the newish vendors that might support a dozen, and the brand new tool vendors, or the people that are spinning up something as part of their college testing project that support one protocol. The question is, where do you get the value in that performance testing effort? A performance test really only does one thing: it generates data. It generates a measurement of response time, and ideally, it also collects a measurement of system resources, because a response time is only an indicator of how the system is being used. It's not the end goal itself.
Mm-hmm.
And that also means that you could get this out of production as well. You could get this measurement of time and this measurement of system resources. Where you deliver value is in taking a look at what resources are in use during those times where you have a state change in the system, where it goes from an acceptable response time to an unacceptable response time to unresponsive to where it falls over. And that will give you some indication, along with the cost associated with those individual response times, of where you have an issue in the system. What is overload on system resources? A lot of the current tools in the market, and I'm going to pick on the open source tools because they're an easy target, and they don't have a representative to come online and defend themselves, unlike the commercial tools. The open source tools tend to be single taskers. They are load throwers. That is, I define something that can throw load at the system and I collect response time. But they're missing that core piece of how do you monitor a system to understand what resource is in use at that point. They then say, well, I'm going to go grab another tool for that and plug it in. And so, okay, well, what about analysis? Oh, I'm going to use R. I'll go grab another tool and use that and plug it in. And what about reporting? Oh, I'll use this other interface. And all that's well and good. And they may be picking really excellent single task tools, but now you've built a 4 tool set versus a 1 tool set for the commercial tools. And that's really where the commercial tools have value, is they provide a singular interface to conduct all the activities, or the majority of the activities, associated with generation of load, collection of results, analysis of results, and maybe even a little bit of reporting. Whereas so there's an efficiency gain there. And if you look at the truly historical tools, we're going to pick on Micro Focus Load Runner in this case, with 30 plus interfaces. Their big selling point to an organization is now you have one tool to run all these different interfaces for, Telnet for your if I can talk here, Telnet based applications for your warehouse management app. You still have some Corba stuff going on that you're supporting. You have a direct to database piece. You have MQ. You have a very complex enterprise. And that is a really effective message to a testing team, that I have one tool that I can use for all these interfaces. But if you go to the open source route, let's say you pick, we'll call it, you pick a tool, and you pick a tool as a load generator, and you need a new interface that's not supported. Hey, go for it. It's an open source tool. Modify the source, add that interface, contribute back to the community. But most people who claim that that's a benefit, that I could do this, I have the source code, I can make the modifications, stuff like that. They never do. They're just leveraging the work product that's been built by somebody else, and they do not have the skills nor the time or the budget to actually extend and support those tools. I know that was a little bit of a rant. And Scott, you're on silent.
Sorry, sorry. So let me push you just a little bit further because we have had this conversation before, but I want to you took a little bit of a rabbit trail. Let's chop
Yep.
off the open source. Let's actually say
Yep.
it's a commercial vendor who has actually built one thing with really good analysis for what they do, but they just chose not to do 30 interfaces. They chose to do 2 because that's the customer base they want. And that customer base is only doing, say, HTTP and some API testing, and they're able to do whatever they need, but they have a solid tool. Do you think that we will see some segmentation with commercial tools where they just say, look, we're building for the companies who started in 2014 or 2012 and beyond, and sorry, I mean, that's just not, it'd be great if we could do it, but we don't have the bandwidth to do it. Leave it to the 30 plus interface vendors to take care of that. That doesn't mean this new commercial vendor is any less important if they provide their customers what they want. That's what I'm saying is if you don't have to do all
Yes.
this putting everything together, do you think we'll see some segmentation in the market for that?
We're already seeing that. Um, you can take a look at Micro Focus to Neotis before they were acquired by Tricentis. Neotis built a very respectable market share just on HTTP alone.
Mm-hmm.
Now they've added some other interfaces as well to compete in that enterprise market, specifically, I believe, SAP and Citrix,
Mm-hmm.
to take some core interfaces which were keeping LoadRunner installed at customers. But there's no reason why, if you're building for the modern enterprise and you don't expect to have anything that's not an HTTP transport, that you couldn't build a really solid commercial tool. What you're going to have to face, however, is you now face your direct competition is the open source tools. I know you didn't really want to go there, Scott,
Well, but that
but
would be the competition, though. Can the open
that
source
that that would
world
be
do
the
that?
direct that would be the direct competition, and you have to provide a compelling value argument that you can get higher value out of your commercial tool that supports this one interface that all these open source tools provide, faster, easier, and you're going to be going after the same targeted user base. The user base has problems. About 90% of them have never been trained, self educated. Very few of them have had mentors. And one of the things that has caused people to abandon commercial tools altogether is they're paying for a license and they're not getting a whole lot of value. And people have been able to achieve exactly the same low value from the open source tool.
Okay. So you bring up a really good point. The value. Open source versus commercial in value. Let's think about what's happening in the observability space. We have many companies, including a recent announcement by Dynatrace that says we're establishing an open source area of our company, a new division where it's dedicated to open source. They're helping to build out things like Prometheus exporters and open telemetry.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all in the name of standardization. There's 150 different companies, I guess, or 150 different exporters on Prometheus alone. So there's a push for that. And when I talked to Steve Flanders about this, he said that's because they don't see the value in creating the telemetry in open telemetry. Everybody wants that. Everybody has a shared problem in that they need this telemetry. But where the value comes in when they're building a platform and you're needing to pick between Dynatrace, Splunk, New Relic, wherever, it's in the visualization. How well can we visualize that telemetry to help you as the user get to the problem as fast as possible in a way you can understand it and make it easy for you? That's the value, is in the visualization. Don't you think that that would be the case for performance as well? Everybody has the same problem. They need to generate load, but we've always said the value is in the analysis. It's the visualization that gets you to the bottleneck determination, you know?
I would even argue it's a little bit higher up than the analysis. So you have analysis, which yields recommendations,
Mm-hmm.
and it's that recommendations, once fully realized, that generates the value. So I could appropriately identify an issue, I could appropriately recommend a fix, but until that fix is actually implemented, I haven't achieved value. And so many organizations in performance testing, they stop at data generation. They give you a list of response times. They never analyze. They never understand why. They never make a recommendation. Those are left to other parts of the organization. The people running Dynatrace, the people with the open telemetry, Splunk users, to actually address that question of why, and then to make the recommendation and finally have that fix. If you are a performance tester and you orphan that work, that analysis and recommendation, all the way through, you are cutting off your value. And your replacement will be even less expensive because your organization will constantly seek the lowest dollar to generate data and the lowest dollar tool as well.
When we think about the difference between APM and observability, the thought is APM would tell you what was wrong, or an area where it was wrong. And the better you are at figuring out what to monitor and what to look for and weeding out the noise, the better you are of coming to the conclusion we know where the problem is. Whereas observability says the reason we're grabbing all this stuff is to not tell you that there's a problem, it's to tell you this is how your business is doing right now. This is how your system is doing. Here's how healthy your system is, and you should do these things. And if there's any kind of AI involved, you might have a way to earn some trust from that AI algorithm to actually fix that problem for you to keep your business healthy. Is there a parallel with performance testing as well in that realm?
These are complementary data sets. I mean, APM generates a measurement of time. Observability, in many cases, generates a measurement of time. You spent 5 seconds in the database, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have complementary data sets going downstream of CPU, disk memory, and network. So these items work together, whether you have observability with open telemetry involved in a performance test, whether you have APM involved inside of your functional testing to tell you something is slow. They're all giving you measurements of time or a measurement of resource. When you look at APM combined with open telemetry, not only can it tell you, hey, X is slow, but it can tell you Y part of X is slow. So now you know exactly where to go to look for why you're having an issue. Splunk likes to quote often that mean time to resolution, MTTR, shortening that through semantic logging and things of that nature to be able to really address enterprise issues. And all of this material simply allows you to get to mean time to resolution faster, but only if you know how to use it. Vendors of all stripe will tell the executive tier that with our tool, any business analyst can do X. I mean, Mercury was famous for that, or infamous, depending upon how you look at it. What they were trying to do, and what they continue to try to do, is really to handle a sales objection on labor. Oh my God, I've bought this tool. Now I have to go out and get someone who knows how to use it, and they're very expensive. So instead, what generations of business executives have tried to do is throw any business analyst at the tool with the promise that they were going to be effective. And if they weren't, well, clearly it was a tool issue. You get a cheaper tool, throw the same business analyst. What's really happened is that the market has generated less effective business analysts, and you're chasing a singularity through the universe in that case. But realistically, there is a foundation set of skills in order to be effective, to generate value. It's unfair to the business analyst to throw them into that role without them having training and mentoring in order to generate value. And the next vendor that comes to your door and says, any business analyst can, you might consider showing them the door, or have them show you the business analyst they're talking about.
So, quite a conversation, huh? We talked a lot about various things. You might have strong feelings about that. If you do, I'd like to know what you think about that. So, with the article that was mentioned in the very beginning of that interview was do you need a SSTET or do you need a SEAL? It's an article that I wrote on LinkedIn back in 2017. And I'm going to revisit that in a separate episode of this podcast. But for now, I'd like to know what you thought about this conversation with James. Do you have strong feelings either way? What do you think we're going to see in the market? You can always reach out to me through my website, scottmoore.consulting. You can contact me through LinkedIn. There's a profile there, URL for that, and as well as my Twitter handle. I'd like to thank our sponsors today. Our first sponsor is this Micro Focus, the makers of Load Runner Solutions. Performance matters. Did you know that Load Runner Solutions have the largest community of practitioners? Join this community at community.microfocus.com. We'll have a link in the show notes as well as the YouTube video as well. I also would like to thank Folk Consulting, who sponsored this podcast. They offer high-quality consulting services around application performance management, monitoring, application delivery, analytics, digital management, any of that stuff. I've known Ryan and his crew for quite a while. They've got consultants who have been doing this longer than I have. And so if you need that kind of specialization in these areas, give Ryan a call, tell him Scott Moore sent you. And we thank you very much, sponsors, for supporting this show and supporting the performance community. Have you signed up for the YouTube channel yet? If you haven't, please subscribe, like some content, and also give me feedback. You can reach me by email at help@scottmoore.consulting. Love to hear from people. Love all the comments, suggestions for improvement. We are working on a lot of that stuff, so I long to hear more of that from you. So that's our episode for today. We'll revisit that SEAL and the lifecycle engineer piece in another episode in the future. For now, that's today's podcast. And I'm Scott Moore for the SMC Journal, where it's all about performance. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.